help. So I understand we do have Congressman Rick Crawford on the phone with us now. Congressman, how's it going, sir?
Going pretty good today.
Well, good. Well, look, I'm thrilled that you got to call in, and I understand that you have some thoughts about the State of the Union address, and I got to tell you, I know you're not the only one, but just kind of tell us, what did you think of President Obama's State of the Union address on Tuesday?
Well, I'll tell you, the entire address, I would just sit there dumbfounded that there was no mention of Keystone Pipeline.
Yeah.
And you're going to sit there and talk about how we're going to create jobs and energy independence, and there was a golden opportunity to do both, and yet he was more concerned about pushing that off till after the 2012 presidential election than he was about actually, making any kind of measurable progress with respect to job creation and energy independence. Now, touting an all of the above approach to energy production, I'm all for that. But that doesn't mean you take our traditional production methods off the table. We can't do that.
Yeah.
And this is all part of a big initiative to try and secure our own domestic energy sources and maximize them. And here was a great opportunity. And Canada's got to do business. They've got a resource there. They're going to, harvest that and take it to the marketplace. And if the marketplace doesn't exist in the United States, they're going to China. That is a travesty.
Yeah.
And I just can't imagine passing by such a great opportunity. And I don't know how many people realize here in Arkansas what an impact that's going to have here on our state, because Wellspun Tubular in North Little Rock has been engaged in full 100% of their production over the last 18 months has been dedicated to preparing for the Keystone Pipeline. Now, why that's relevant is because the president said there wasn't enough time for him to study the impact. Well, that's false, because this project's been in the works for 3 years, and Wellspun Tubular has been actively engaged in production to meet the demand of that pipeline for the last 18 months. That's 100% of their production has been geared toward Keystone Pipeline. That's here in Arkansas. So we're losing jobs. Not only did we not get some new jobs, 20,000 immediately, but now we've lost jobs here in the state of Arkansas. That is just bad policy and bad politics.
Yeah, and you're right. There was no mention of it. As a matter of fact, there was mention of, I think, what you referred to. I believe he said we need to double down on green energy policy. And I'm all for green technology, if the market's ready for it, if it's a viable technology, personally. But, Congressman Crawford, I got to say, in light of what we know now about Solyndra and the $500 million debacle that was, the Federal Bureau of Investigation raiding the offices of Solyndra, do you think President Obama was just counting on people, most of his constituents, not knowing what a travesty that was? Or, what's his play here?
I don't know if he was counting on people, maybe hoping people wouldn't be aware. But, again, we're not through with all of that, the federal subsidies and things like that and the guaranteed loans to some of these green companies. There's still more investigations taking place. There's going to be other Solyndras before it's all over with. Solyndra is a big one. But, you can't, when you're gambling with taxpayer dollars, that's entirely inappropriate. And so $500 billion gamble with taxpayer money, to me, is very irresponsible, to say the least.
Yeah, I agree. There was really no mention of the debt or tackling the deficit. And
the other thing, there were two glaring omissions, and I mentioned that in my televised response, too. Nothing about the debt, nothing about Keystone. And so what we're talking about here is, we've got people saying, where are the jobs? Well, I can tell you where the jobs were or where they would have been, and now I can tell you that we're going to actually lose jobs as a result of it. But then again, you want to talk about the debt. Well, we're only $15.2 trillion in change in debt. It exceeds our gross domestic product now. So essentially, we're at 100% of our gross domestic product, and no mention of the debt. So, listen, I'm going to tell you what. The president delivers a speech like nobody I think we've ever seen. He's a phenomenal speaker.
Yeah.
But you really have to listen to what he's saying and listen to what he doesn't say. You come away with the message that he's mostly interested in campaigning, and he's mostly interested in green technology and things of that nature. And listen, as you said, if it's market-driven, then I think that's wonderful. But let the market decide. And the government is not in the business of picking winners and losers, or it shouldn't be. The government should create an economic climate that's favorable for the marketplace to do business. And then we'll start to see, as market demand, we've got so much regulatory compliance in place in this country with the government. Nobody's going to be able to. I just don't. I think there's sufficient regulatory oversight in this country that you don't need to have your hand in every single aspect of everything we do in our lives. So let the business marketplace take its course, and let business people be entrepreneurs and address the market needs that exist as they become a market. But the government doesn't need to play that role.
I completely agree. Also, Congressman Crawford, I do want to say the only we mentioned how he's not really focusing on the debt. It seemed to me that the only the only part of the speech that might have reflected just the shadow of him addressing the debt was targeted at sort of a class warfare rhetoric. I kind of tried to watch the speech as if I weren't a conservative and we're just kind of a middle of the road guy, and it was kind of hard actually. But I just kind of felt that maybe he was saying, if we only will just demonize the wealthy enough, and we come out and talk about Warren Buffett's secretary. It seemed to me that he was trying to convince people watching that that'll somehow solve our deficit problem. We also saw it, with him talking about the savings, the quote savings from Iraq and Afghanistan, like there's going to be some pile of cash now that we're drawing down our troops there, when in fact that money was just borrowed like we're doing everything else, and so we're not really going to pay down our debt. We're just borrowing less. Can you talk about? I mean, I just thought it was full of financial sleight of hand and just half truths.
Well, no, you're exactly right. The idea that somehow there's going to be a windfall as a result of not being engaged in Iraq is just pure fallacy. I mean, that's just not the case. And it's the same thing with Afghanistan. You can't calculate that in. That's borrowed money. It's just less money we have to borrow. So to say that, okay, now we've got this big giant pile of money, we're gonna put half of that into social programs and half of it to pay down debt. Well, that's flawed. But that's what he proposed, was that we would take half of it and invest it in green technology or some other kind of thing, and then take half of it and pay down debt. Well, that's still not good policy, even if that were the case. Even if we were all of a sudden the beneficiaries of this great windfall as a result of drawing down in Iraq, it would still not make sense to put half of it on debt reduction. We need debt reduction fast. We don't need to, tap dance around this. The fact of the matter is, as I said before, $15.2 trillion in debt, and the wheels are turning steadily, and the numbers keep rolling right off on our debt, and it looks to me like that ought to be a priority. I mean, when you see that we're equal to our GDP with our debt, or actually now exceeding it, that's cause for concern. And you want to, pretend that if you had this money, it still wouldn't be satisfactory, because if you had that money, you'd want to put it all on debt reduction.
Yeah, I agree. And again, I just want to say to the listeners out there, you mentioned that we're over 100%, with our gross domestic product, and there's been no country that I know of. That's what a lot of experts believe is the tipping point. Once you surpass 100%, and I believe we're at 103%, it's very difficult to turn the aircraft carrier around at that point. And so we definitely need people like you, Congressman, who know what time it is and know that we've got to reduce the debt fast.
Well, that's absolutely right. And here's the message I think I want people to recognize, is that we are dangerously close as a country to being near that point that Greece is now going through, and Spain, Portugal, Ireland, some of these European nations that are going through this same problem. And, austerity sounds bad. I mean, we don't want to, but, we can get through this if we just reprioritize and determine, what's the most important thing for us in this country. I mean, do we have to have every luxury item? Do people have to have free cell phones? I mean, those kinds of things. I mean, that sounds, I'm not trying to be flippant here. I'm being as forthright as I know to be here. We have programs that the federal government is paying for, your tax dollars are paying for, to fund free cell phones for qualified individuals. I mean, these are luxury items, and while I know that doesn't account for a lot of the budget, that's just one example. There are other things that I could mention that, you have to think. People are talking about investing in infrastructure. That's important. There's a return on that investment because it facilitates commerce. But as much as we would like to have bike trails, do we really have the money for that luxury item? And I think people are going to have to start to take a broader view of government funding and realize that it's finite and it's going to have to be limited, and it's going to have to be targeted at those people who absolutely need it the most. And I'm just give you an example. I was out at Jonesboro Human Development Center earlier today. This is an example of these folks are struggling to meet their financial needs through federal tax dollars. And these are the people that these programs are designed for. And yet, because the programs have been broadened so much, we've missed the business of targeting those that are in most need of those resources, that can't do for themselves. And we're going to take a really close look at just what our priorities are as a culture, and what we can afford to do and what we can afford to do without. But we've got some hard decisions to make here, and it's not just about making these decisions in Washington. People need to understand that there is not an endless pot of money in Washington, and we cannot continue to borrow and spend and borrow and spend and borrow and spend and leave anything for our children. And